Welcome, everyone, to today's webinar on moving your project management past Excel. I'm Brian O'Leary, Executive Director of the Book Industry Study Group, and I'm really happy to welcome the Director of Sales and Education at Firebrand Technologies, Joshua Talent, who's a member of our workflow committee, as well as several other committees and working groups within BISG. In some ways, Joshua is the James Brown of volunteerism within BISG, the hardest working man in show business. Joshua is also naturally an educator. It's the part of his role that I think he likes the best. And so he's put together some materials today to kind of walk you through some options that you might have to just up your game when it comes to project management. Joshua, thank you for doing that. We will have time at the end for questions, and I'm sure that we'll have lots to talk about once you've had a chance to educate us. So, Joshua, welcome.
Thank you very much, Brian. The James Brown. I love that. That's great. Welcome, everyone. Glad that you could join us today. I hope that this is going to be inspiring and helpful for you. A little bit of background, just so you know kind of where I'm coming from on this. Obviously, I've been in publishing for a long time, helping publishers with a lot of these kinds of questions of how do I move past Excel? How do I up my game when it comes to metadata tracking or workflow management, especially? And I think this is one of those things that every publisher deals with. So I'm going to be talking today from the kind of the perspective of big system changes or big changes to workflows, tools, and how do I approach that kind of project? But you can also think about everything we're going to say today from a more, kind of a lower level perspective. If you've got some sort of Excel spreadsheet that multiple people in your company are managing things in and having to do stuff with, a lot of these same ideas will still apply. And the goal really for any company, regardless of, publishing and outside publishing, is to try to make things more efficient and bring things into a single systems and to have consistency across the board. So that's the goal, right? And we want to make sure you're meeting that goal. And what can we do to, kind of get you to that goal? So when it comes to today's presentation, that's my hope, is that I can help you do that. And I'll also say, in addition to selling title management software, which I do every day, I'm also in the middle of this kind of process myself, because our team just at the beginning of the year got a license for HubSpot and have been kind of implementing HubSpot for our marketing and sales tracking and things like that. And we're also right now, like here at the end of the year, finally getting into a real, like, in the middle of getting out of Excel, getting that HubSpot system all configured and set up for our use in a way that we haven't been able to so far this year. So this is a big project for us, and I'm kind of going through the pain and trying to figure it out myself. So hopefully going to take some of that, understanding of your pain and bring it into the presentation today as well. As has been said, if you have questions, you can drop them in the Q&A there, and we'll answer those at the end or maybe in the middle if I catch something as I'm going. But let's talk a little bit about kind of the direction I want to go. And this is very simple. I don't want to go really deep and give you too much to walk away from here with. So I'm going to give you some foundational ideas, some things that I think you can do. Basically 5 steps. So let's talk about the 5 steps that you can take to move your team past Excel or past the kind of weird non-integrated systems and workflows you have. And the first thing is always to surface the pain. You have to build internal buy-in from your team. If your team doesn't understand the value of moving past Excel, moving out of that Excel spreadsheet that they're always using, then they're not going to support the move. So whatever the process is you're trying to replace, or the other tool you're trying to replace, the goal is always first and foremost to get the team on board and help understand as well, what are the pain points they have? Why do you even want to move outside of that Excel spreadsheet or outside of that other system? So first thing is, talk to your team about the struggles they have with Excel or the details they're trying to deal with. Come up with 5 to 10 concrete blockers that keep you from doing your job well. Do you have data that's going stale? Do you have to do duplicate entry in different systems? Things like ISBNs and titles that have to be put in multiple places. Where do the handoffs fail? What kind of columns? Nobody wants to handle the data in that column, and we don't know who's responsible for it. Maybe you're having other issues. Your pub dates are out of sync across different platforms, or your art due dates aren't, kind of in the right place. They're buried in column Z and nobody ever sees them. So think about those concrete blockers that kind of keep your team from doing their job well. And then discuss the top 3 use cases. Maybe that's title lifecycle. Maybe that's building your seasonal list. Maybe it's assets or permissions. What are the things that you're needing to do, the top use cases that will help your team buy into this idea of moving to some other system or some other process that is more efficient and more powerful for them? So, first thing, surface that pain, figure out exactly where the problems are. The second step is going to be to define the goals, right? So, what is the goal you actually have? You can't go into any kind of change of process or change of tooling or change of anything if you don't understand what you want on the other side of it. So, you have to define your success before looking at tools, before looking at solutions. So I would include the following. If you're thinking about, defining these goals and what they have, outcomes is obviously a really big one. What's the sort, we want the source of truth for all of our title data in one place. That's a very legitimate outcome. It's a very solid outcome. We want to be able to see what's late very easily. We want automated reminders. Those are outcomes that you want from whatever the move is, whatever the new system is. Another thing is must-haves. What are the things your team cannot do without? What are the things that they absolutely have to be able to do with whatever tool or solution or whatever you're doing? Being able to handle assignees, and due dates. Being able to put some sort of comment or note on a record. Being able to put file storage in there, or having a change history, who changed what when. Basic automation, those kinds of things. These are must-haves. Write those down. Come up with that list of what your team has to have to be efficient in what they're doing. Then there's also the nice to haves. Data ingestions are usually nice, API connections, workload views, or permissions that you need to set, or reports that you want to be able to pull. What are the things that would be helpful, but not necessarily imperative? What are the add-ons or the nice to haves that would give you something more beneficial long term, but maybe not something you absolutely have to have, regardless of what system it's in? Another thing to think about is the constraints and the budget that you have. You have to have a budget. You have to have a range of budget, at least. And knowing things like the number of seats that you'll need to have in the new software, the security needs that you might have, who's going to administer the software. And when it comes to this part, I would highly recommend, this is where it's absolutely necessary that you create a budget for software investments in your company. No company in the modern world can manage everything that you do without investments in software technology. So ignoring this part of the requirement and not having a budget, or having a very, very small budget that's too small for the kind of thing you're trying to do, is like trying to buy a house without a down payment or pre-approval or a loan. You can't do it if you don't have the budget. So it's very important to have that foundation from the beginning and know that we're going to invest. We're going to put money into whatever the project is, and we're going to try to right size that budget based on the kind of changes we need to make within the company as we're replacing Excel or replacing other tools. And then the last thing here on defining your goals is growth. Where do you see your publishing company being in 5 years or even 3 years? Are you anticipating fast growth, maybe a new distribution agreement or new imprints that you're acquiring, or staff changes, or any other major events? Any tool that needs to be replaced that quickly is not worth using. So if you're 3 years down the road and you have to redo the whole process all over again, that's not necessarily the tool you want to invest in now. Build for the future. Make sure that whatever tool you're going to end up growing into is going to grow with you as you expand your business, or as you expand that part of your business. Okay. The next thing on our list is to investigate the options. You'll notice we're step 3 before we even start looking at solutions. And when you're thinking about this, again, you want to think about your needs first, and your abilities second, before you worry about what's out there. So understand what's available, do the research, figure out what systems are going to work best for your needs. Now that you know your pain points, that's going to be a whole lot easier. Now that you know your success criteria, that's going to be a whole lot easier as well. So it's time to investigate those options. This is where, in the kind of title management or the product workflow solutions, since we're in the workflow committee trying to talk about workflows, knowing the difference between all-in-one and best-in-class is really important. Solutions in the publishing world tend to be one or the other. They're either the all-in-one kind of, throw everything in the pot, you can do everything in the system, versus a best-in-class solution that tries to focus really in on the things that you can't do very well in generic software. Also, knowing what publishing-centric software can do versus generic software. A lot of publishers will try to take a generic software application and, use a mallet to hammer it into working for a publishing workflow. And that's fine if you can make it work. But again, there's an investment of time, an investment of energy, and there's also value in looking the other direction at publishing specific or publishing centric tools that can help you do that more efficiently within the concept and the context of the publishing workflow. So always choose best based on what's your best fit. Your company may have different needs that won't be, solutioned by the systems that are out there that are kind of standard publishing systems. That's fine. Whatever your workflow requires, whatever your process requires, go back to that list of needs that you created, back to those must-haves, and make sure that you're meeting those needs with the goal of ongoing growth. Now, it may be that you need a stopgap measure. You may need something that is going to last you for 2 or 3 years, but it's a small investment right now that gets you the next step. If that's the case, plan for that. Go ahead and say, look, we're going to implement this very generic, very simple, very inexpensive tool right now to get us out of Excel and get us into a workflow that we can manage and do something, whatever it is, to get us that one step. But we know 3 years from now, we're going to need to go into a publishing centric tool or a broader workflow tool or a title management system or whatever. Think about that plan, that growth plan, and try to build that out. All right, so now that you know what you're doing, now you have to plan the implementation. And this is where working with the partners you're talking to and talking to them about what the implementation might look like is going to be the most important. This is where you've already got some knowledge about the tools. You're working and talking with these companies, whatever they are, or you're doing trials or whatever, the free software is or whatever. So go into that initial implementation project with whatever company you decide to go with a clear understanding of the staff time and the expectations that you should have internally. This is the if you fail to plan, you plan to fail kind of process, right? Expect to dedicate many hours of your staff's time to any kind of major transition from Excel and kind of, fractured workflows into centralized systems or into big systems. Now, again, if you're doing this, back to my original point, if you're doing this on a small scale, it's just for one Excel spreadsheet, we really need to try to figure out a workflow around that. Maybe it's not as big of an investment, but the goal is as much as possible, plan in advance for this. So how do you take advantage of an implementation project with a partner that you're working with? What do you do to make sure that implementation is going to go well? What do you plan for as part of that implementation? The first thing is training. Training sessions are absolutely important for buy-in and for understanding for your team. New tools take time to pick up. So make sure that you have in your implementation plan time for training sessions, for personal individual training, for key members of your team. Some people on your team may have a harder time picking up a new tool. So plan for that and try to make sure they have time in their schedules to spend extra time doing training or watching videos or whatever's going to help them do the most, pick up things more easily. Another thing is importing and cleaning up your data, right? This is a big part of any implementation of any kind of project. So you want to make sure you have time built in. And if you can, start doing that cleanup early. Before you even go to this step of implementation, go ahead and plan from the very beginning. Start cleaning up your product data. Start double checking the quality of your data. Look at your printing data or your contracts or whatever, and try to get stuff kind of situated so that by the time you get to implementation, you're not having to, go through everything at the last minute or try to do things in a very short period of time. Another thing is configuration, right? How you configure whatever tool you're working with is going to make a big difference in how you use it. So take the time to configure the tools properly, to do it the way that makes sense. Get comfortable in that system. Get comfortable using the tool. Get comfortable, configuring it to your workflows. And the more you know your workflows, the more you know what you need, the easier that's going to be. And then more training. I always recommend more training because training is so important to learning new systems, understanding new systems, getting comfortable, but not just at the beginning. That means later down the road. So as you're learning the system, you're gonna find things that you didn't prioritize early on that now I have time to learn. There's some feature or tool of the system that I didn't really get before. I didn't understand it before in the general training that we did. So let me go back to that and do some more training on that feature and try to understand it better. But then also, how internally are you going to get your team to understand the process and the workflows that you have that are unique to your company, because every company has different things that you needed to do. So when you're doing configuration and implementing a new system, you want to make sure as well that everyone is kind of, doing the internal training as well about your own personal workflows and your own personal needs. And that takes us to step 5. This is where it's important to make things stick, right? Creating ownership and continuing to learn and iterate in any system. So this is where it's really important to define the different roles that you have. Clearly defining your roles helps your team become more comfortable in new systems and in new workflows. In project management, there's actually a common method for this called RACI. RACI is an acronym for different kind of assignment types within a project. Who's responsible, who's accountable, who is consulted, and who is informed. So we don't have time to get into all this. You can go look. There's really good videos on YouTube that kind of explain what this process is. But generally, the goal should be for everyone on the team to be comfortable with the new workflow and the new tool that you've created and working on, and the changes that you're making, and to know where they fit in that process, in the tasks that are responsible for, or whatever else. So the responsible person is expected to develop and complete the work that's assigned to them. There's something, that task is their responsibility. They're going to do it. The accountable person is the person who ensures that the work is getting done against the guidelines or following the agreed timeline. There may be a manager or someone higher up who's watching and making sure things get done. The consulted person is going to provide guidance that's often the prerequisite for other project tasks. So maybe there's someone who is related in a different department who needs to be able to consult and say, hey, don't forget about this part or whatever else. And then the informed person are people that are going to need to remain in communication, in the loop, and know what's going on, but they're not necessarily people who will have a lot to say about what's happening. So probably, higher up management. So in addition to this concept, this idea of clearly defining your roles and making sure your team is comfortable in the new systems, it's imperative that you figure out who your champions are. One person per department, or just one person if your company is small, who serves as frontline support for information, for configuration expertise, for cheerleading the new tool. That person or people who are really the power users. They're the people that you're going to make the champions internally for the whole process. Take advantage of free training when you can. Ongoing customer success options that your partner may provide. Whatever options are available, take advantage of that. Make sure you're using that. Don't go 2 months down the road or 6 months or a year or 2 years down the road and not engage more with the people that you're working with, the companies that you're working with, the partners that are helping you implement. Do some internal office hours or some internal conversations. 30 minutes every couple of weeks is great. Just 30 minutes for your team to jump on and say, I've got questions about this workflow, or I've got questions about this tool we implemented. Having that time for people to ask the experts internally questions that it's a good time for them to also kind of surface things that people may not know are happening, or may not know are happening the wrong way or not being used the right way in the tool. And then also, again, plan for iterative improvement. Just like a car, workflow and data systems will eventually require tune-ups and repairs. So in addition to all of the other stuff you're doing, plan to continue adding new configuration, taking into consideration more features of the system that you're using that you haven't started using yet. Finding other spreadsheets that somebody has there in that folder, and they have been hiding from everybody else, and how can I retire that spreadsheet next? How can I take advantage of the system to its fullest extent? So in conclusion, moving past Excel is not an easy task, especially when your team has been using it for a long time. Getting people out of their comfort zones may take some time. It may take some effort. It probably will. But the efficiencies that you gain from moving into publishing systems, into systems that are made for workflow development and workflow management, are going to be beneficial to you long term. So take the time, build out those tool sets, and take advantage of the opportunity that you have to make the next step. All right. That's it. I'm gonna stop sharing my screen. That's my contact info if you want to reach out to me personally. But let's go into question and answer here. The question was asked about the slides. Yes, I will make the slides available to BISG, and happy to have them shared with you.
Thank you, Joshua. One question that came in was along the way was that somebody who struggles with committing time for data cleanup, they focus on implementation and training, but they don't leave enough time for data cleanup. And the question for you is, do you have suggestions for how to successfully incorporate that step? It's an issue for any tool over time. So you probably have, yeah, I'm sure that in all of your implementations, this is a source of consideration.
Yeah, data cleanup. I always say that your metadata is your most important non-people resource. So when you're talking about how data is cleaned up and how people are managing that data cleanup, you have to prioritize it honestly. Whether it's contract data or royalty information or metadata or workflow information, whatever it is, that data you have to have people on the team who have time dedicated to that cleanup work. So my recommendation generally, let's talk about metadata, for example. I would recommend having a team member or team members who every month have a dedicated list of titles that they're supposed to go and clean up the data on. That's a great way of just kind of breaking out your, front list, your last 3 years of publishing and kind of build out a plan so every title at least gets some eyeballs on it every month or every year. So that goal is really, it's a question of what kind of data cleanup you're talking about, but that's a way to do it. But it's really about time. It's about making sure your team has the time and then dedicates the time to that cleanup. And whatever that cleanup is, whatever kind of data it is, you want the experts who know that data well to be the ones looking at it. So make sure that it's the right people doing that cleanup and having time in their schedule as part of their regular tasks to be able to do that.
Yeah, when we implemented the association management system that BISG currently uses, we went through a process that was about 6 months where the vendor, in this case Novi, required us to validate several different steps for data cleanup, and they would not push it live without having gone through that process. So if
Yeah.
we didn't do the data cleanup, we weren't going to get the system we needed. And that's a if there's a carrot, that's the stick. So
Yeah.
another question is, how do you find the new tools? Now, I know your bias is that everybody goes to the implementation or the options piece first, and that makes you crazy. But if you're looking for tools, if you aren't already there and you're small, how do you make sure that you surface the most relevant options?
So sometimes this is just searching, right? You do searches with different words and different phrases. This is where AI tools can be kind of helpful for searching. AI, generative AI is getting better now at being able to tell you what tools might be available for certain types of processes. The biggest thing really is talking to other publishers. What are other publishers using? Go to conferences and talk to people. Get on conference calls with people at BISG and ask, hey, what do you use for that? We haven't figured out how to fix our royalties, and we need a better plan for how we do our royalties. What tools do you use for that? This is where the publishing industry, I think, has a better leg up on almost every other industry, is we're pretty small and we're pretty tight knit. And so when you start talking to people, you'll start to see patterns and hear about tools you've never heard of. I was on a call today with a publisher and told him about 2 or 3 things he had never heard of. Been in business for 15 years, had never heard of certain tools that were out there and available in the marketplace that were really key to the problems he was having. So just ask, start talking to people and engaging.
Yeah, our committee structure provides access in a lot of ways to
Yep.
the kinds of people that you're thinking about. So, dude, we were just back from Frankfurt last week, you and I both, and there are quite a few vendors there, but it's a lot of work to kind of go door to door and get the skinny on what they do. Um, Edson's asking, in terms of project management, are there platforms that you might suggest? And he's also wondering if any are free. Um,
Yeah.
so,
I I always recommend against free platforms, mostly because free is free is you get what you pay for when it comes
right.
down to it. There are lots of platforms out there for project management. Again, it depends on the kinds of management you need, the size of your company, the capabilities that you're looking for. There's a lot of kind of detail about that. So obviously, I'm biased. I work for a company that provides project management software for publishers, but there's lots of other companies out there that do the same kind of stuff. So the question is going to be mostly, what is your budget? What are you looking at? Again, go through those first couple of steps. We don't get to the step of looking at tools until we actually know what we need first. So first, define and figure out what you're working on, what you need, and the key requirements, so that when you go and start looking at tools, you'll be able to very quickly sift through the ones that are too big or too small, or don't do the thing that you need them to do, or don't have the focus or priorities that you have in developing that process.
Right. And for project management itself, I mean, as opposed to the publishing specific applications, we use Monday.
Yep.
Actually, Monday for us is free because we're a nonprofit. And there are options like Asana that if you're an individual user, you can get at least limited functionality as an individual. That's something to kind of chase. A
Yep.
question I wanted to ask you, particularly with respect to making change stick, the iteration piece, because
Mhm.
a big implementation. I mean, you've described both small and big options, but a big implementation in particular, you get to the end of it. I remember the 2022 change for our AMS. It integrated with QuickBooks and it changed our website. I got to January of 2023 and I'm like, okay, that's over.
Yeah.
Let's never talk about that again. How do you break through that barrier?
The biggest thing is making sure you have time and budget set aside in the years after that implementation to make sure that you're taking advantage of the way the tool actually helps you, right? Any initial implementation, especially of a large tool, is going to take a lot of time. It's going to take a lot of energy. People are going to be burned out by the end of any kind of implementation like that. But at the end of that, if you put on the calendar, okay, I'm going to give myself 3 months to be using it, seeing how it works. And then I'm going to come back to that solution provider or come back to the solution itself and start looking again at other features it might have. And also, don't another thing I see a lot of times is publishers will use a tool. They don't use all the features of the tool, or they don't, look at the solution provider, like Firebrand, for example, and say, hey, what other things can you help me with? They move on to something else. And it's like hopping and skipping around. And and you're actually spending more effort and spinning your wheels way too much by switching from tool to tool to tool. So it's always better to go back and say, what am I not using enough of? What could I take advantage of more? I've got a problem. Can the solutions I already have in place help me build that out in a way that makes sense?
Yeah, our platform regularly reminds us to read the release notes
Yeah.
because new features come in um, and it creates problems for you. One thing that you did actually when we were going through that project to consider what our next AMS should look like was take some stuff off the table. That I think you specifically said it's not just what you want, but what do you not want? I mean, you had
Yeah.
a couple of functional features that might have been nice to have actually get taken out so that we would have um, a clear shot at getting what we needed. Would you want to talk a little bit about that, how to have a discipline that doesn't just become a collection of features?
Yeah, and again, that kind of comes back to what's the necessary features versus the nice to haves. Always start your focus on necessary features. What are the things we have to fix? What are the pain points we need to solve? Start with that, focus on that, and then if necessary, make sure the solution that you choose turns off things you don't need initially, right? Or makes them invisible, or just don't worry about them, because then your focus is on the things that really matter. But again, just like we said before, you can always come back to that later and say, okay, now I'm done with the core stuff. I'm meeting those needs. I'm not using Excel for that anymore. What's the next thing I can implement? Well, that was a nice to have we wrote down way back when. Let's come back to that. Maybe we can take advantage of that now.
Okay. We're almost at time, but I have a couple of questions. Maybe we can borrow a couple more minutes from you.
Yeah.
One would be from Edson. Is it worth trying to build your own platform in Microsoft Access or FileMaker?
No, it's not. It's really not. And the reason I say that is because so many publishers do that, and then they become software developers for the rest of their lives and trying to support systems that they've homegrown and home built. there's systems out there. And again, like you said, Monday.com or Asana can be very simple project management workflow tools, but they're being built and maintained by companies that know what they're doing in that software. The same thing for title management systems like Firebrands. The goal should be to use systems that take advantage of teams that know what they're doing and can manage and maintain, and let your team do the business of publishing, not the business of software development.
And then my last question for you is kind of a best of breed question. Someone's asking, would you recommend using tools that a current vendor or publisher works with? Or should the publisher go out and find tools independently of their vendor's systems?
It depends on the vendor and what kind of integration you need to build. So let's say you're working with a distributor and your distributor needs to get Onyx data from you to be able to do their work. Then obviously you just need to find a tool that can handle that delivery of Onyx data. You may want other internal requirements to be met as well for that tool, but the goal should be to integrate with whatever system. It's a vendor specific question. So I would say if they require you to use a certain tool, that's a different story. But I don't know of any vendors that would actually put that kind of requirement on a publisher.
Right. Now, I told you that was the last question, but we got
It's
one
fine.
that slipped in from Krista, who is our committee chair. She just makes the observation that when they implement a new tool, she tries to ask how to implement it as out of the box as possible. Um, and she indicates that she usually loses that battle. That leads to a bunch of customizations that make it more difficult to upgrade or update. She's kind of wondering from your perspective, how do you get as much non-custom setup as possible from a partner?
Part of that is going to be, again, from the very beginning, looking at your plan and looking at your, needs and requirements and defining your goals. And the problem for most publishers in answering that question is that every publisher has certain workflows that are unique to that publisher. If you've been around in business for a long time, you're doing things in a very specific way, a very unique way, and sometimes that is just a requirement of the work you do. So unfortunately, for the answer to the question sometimes is you just can't do it. You have to have some sort of customization, some sort of configuration that's unique to your system, and it's just kind of one of the things to do. I would say as well, like go take the opportunity when you're doing an implementation of some new process or tool to try to internally build the buy-in for that non-custom setup. And I guarantee you're going to run into opposition because people like doing things the way they've always been done. But try as best you can to kind of help your team see the value in a non-custom workflow, and wherever possible, implement it that way. But I think in general, when it comes to especially title management systems, which again I know pretty well since I do this work, there's a lot of things that are going to be unique to your workflow that other publishers don't do, or that other publishers do in a different way. And so that's where you're just going to have some configuration in a system. The goal, I think, should be to configure systems and not customize them. And I make that distinction myself because configure means the system can do it. I just need to set it up the right way. Customize means I have to go back to the vendor and say, I need you to add this function to the application. That's different than saying I just want to configure this thing in a system that already can handle a configuration.
Yeah, that's absolutely. I mean, to treat the software as best in show, and then figure out a way to make it work for you. And if it's too constrained, then it's probably not the right solution for you.
Yep.
Well, thank you, Joshua. You've lived up to your reputation as a James Brown of volunteerism.
Happy to help.
Thanks. We'll see you soon.